You're listening to the best of the Martha Zoller Show. To hear the full show each day, tune in to AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN or log in to accesswdun.com and click the Listen Live button from 9 to 11 Monday through Friday. It is the Martha Zoller Show. I'm here with Leah Aldridge live in the studio. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's so nice to be here face to face and not calling you on the phone.
Yeah, and I met Leah first when she was running for office a number of years ago, and since then she has put this wonderful organization together called Women Lead Right, and you're working hard, aren't you?
We're working really hard. You know, Women Lead Right was born out of the chaos of 2020. I had lost a state Senate race in 2018 and continued to be engaged politically. And I was tired of hearing that the Republican Party has a problem with suburban women. And I thought, who better to fix that problem than
a Republican suburban
suburban woman. So we started Women Lead Right, and we've been engaged in campaigns in Georgia ever since. And we're working really, really hard to reach out to formerly reliable Republican women who have disengaged for a variety of reasons, Martha. And our job is to talk to them about the issues that are important to them and to us, and to share with them that the Republican Party is leading on those issues and to try to bring them back to the polls for the Republican Party.
And so what are some of the things you're doing to make that happen?
Well, first of all, we poll them at least twice a year, hyper-local, to ask what are the most important issues to them. It's not always what you would assume. Our goal is to reach women that are usually in the age bracket of 35 to 65. They're often working moms. So once we understand their issues, then we train our members in how to talk to folks in a non-threatening way about politics, about these issues. We write to them, we call them, we text them, and we door knock them. We usually own a really specific universe of women that it's Women Lead Right's job to bring back to the polls. We did it in 2022. We were super successful, and we expect to be successful this time as well.
Yeah, because my biggest concern, and I heard this from Frank Luntz, I've heard this from Eric Erickson, I've heard this from a number of people, is that there's some polling that's showing that of these people that still say they're undecided for whatever reason, that they're concerned they're not going to come to the polls, or if they do, they're not going to vote for president. And, I can't leave a race blank. Okay, I'm just one of those people. I'm going to make a judgment. I'm not going to leave a race blank. I'm not going to say I've never done it. I'm sure there's been some instance. I maybe wrote in somebody one time. Okay. It's just because sometimes you just have to do that. But I think it's really important to be heard, because I think no matter what happens, we want it to be a clear decision, meaning that it represents the voters of America, and we ultimately have a lot of people turn out.
Well, you may feel that way, and I'm the daughter of a veteran, and I feel that way. But I have to tell you, there's a number of women. There are even women members of Women Lead Right who have not yet committed to vote for president. I've gotten them committed to vote for all the down ballot races. Importantly, we're working on 3 sort of at-risk House races that have been identified, I think, by the Speaker. And we're actively going after women voters in those 3 specific races. 2 are in Fulton, 1 is in Gwinnett. So the message of come out and vote no matter what for those down ballot races is resonating. And now we've moved on to, you've got 2 choices here. This is the leader, not just of the United States of America, but really the free world. And the world is on fire. The choices are clear. You may not like either one of them, but it's time to sort of stand up and take a stand. And I think we're resonating, but I'll tell you, I had an event 2 nights ago, and there were several women in the room that are Republican women that said, I just don't know that I can vote for him. So our job, all of us, everyone listening, is to make sure we're talking about what's on the line in this race.
Look, and I make people mad every time I say this, but, I still identify as a Nikki Haley Republican, okay? I don't mind saying that, and I think she would have been a better choice. Set that aside, okay? That is not the choice that we have. And I know not in your role with Women Lead Right, but personally you worked very hard for Nikki Haley, okay? And I think Nikki is doing what needs to be done right now. She is getting out and looking at, making good statements, talking about different issues, talking to those women in the middle, still talking to that group of people. That was her speech at the RNC. It was not talking to the people in the hall. The people that were watching is who she was talking. And that's what we have to be focused on. And that's the point I was making about the Kamala Harris interview last night, is that her audience was not her base voters or Trump's base voters. Her audience was the independents that hadn't made their mind up yet.
I absolutely agree with you. And I would argue it's not just the independents, it is the women out there that have not made up their minds. She thinks that they're a soft target for her. And she's nervous. I think she got nervous a little bit. And so she went on Bret Baier and Fox News and hoped to peel off a few of them and to give them an alternative to Trump, which is why I think she spent the majority of the interview talking about his temperament, talking about how difficult he is, talking about the tone. Because we know from polling women, from working with women in Georgia that are right of center and independent, that's their number one complaint about President Trump. And time again, you heard in 22 minutes that it was all about Trump's rhetoric and his tone as she tried to deflect questions about her record. I disagree.
He's the first person that asked the question, though. You talk about turning the page. You've been a part of this. And I'm so glad he didn't, even though people are calling him a bully, I'm so glad that he didn't back down from asking those questions, because that's what he's supposed to do. He's a journalist.
Well, I do think that she had that Matt Lauer, Hillary Clinton interview in her mind where Hillary won some points because Matt seemed to kind of attack her. And she even used a phrase that I think Hillary Clinton had used, let me finish.
Yes.
You're talking over me. I can't remember. You may remember the exact words, but I don't think it was as effective for her. I also asked some of the women that I know had not yet committed to vote for Trump to provide me with some feedback about what they thought, how well she had done and how they felt Bret Baier had done. And I disagree with your earlier segment, Martha. I don't know that she did what she needed to do to reach these women.
Well, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. We got a couple of text messages in. Mary said, the people complaining about the way Bret interviewed Harris are used to all these feel-good talk show interviews, biased debate narrators, and not used to fair questioning. That's what Mary in Gainesville said. And then Steven said, there are people in this world that have humanity and humility. Kamala Harris has neither. She would climb to the top of Mount Everest without a jacket before she would admit that she made bad decisions. This is a character flaw. Unless she accepts that, she cannot change. So that's a couple of comments.
Well, I agree with Steve, and I think that one of the Women Lead Right women who had not yet committed to vote for Trump, and I've got a quote here. She texted me so I can quote it. She was a Nikki voter, and she said to me, quote, "To me, she was offensive. She did exactly what she accuses Trump of, which is being accusatory and divisive. She kept diverting her failures onto Trump and claiming he is unstable." So I think that, I'm not sure she came across as the likable, calm, humble leader that she wanted to for women that think that Trump is divisive.
Well, and one question I would have liked to have heard asked after she was going through this litany of problems with Trump was that this man has had 2 attempts on his life. Possibly a third one that they were able to thwart through the security going into Coachella last weekend. A man that had 3 guns, and this is so California. 2 guns, and a high-powered magazine was the third thing. and he got a $5,000 bail and got released to come back in January. I just think that's amazing, in that. But that was California. That was out in California. So I just think that the rhetoric she's using is saying to the world or crazy people, it's okay to go after this guy. I mean, if he's really what she says he is, why isn't it okay to go after him?
Mm-hmm. Well, she claims he's mentally unstable, weird, and then she had no response when Brett Baier very clearly said, well, didn't you see that President Biden was also mentally unstable? And I think she got really caught there. I think that lack of humility showed. We all know that it was clear he wasn't up to the job, and she has dug in and is not willing to say, I think he could do his job. I could see that, he was aging. There's lots of things that she could have said.
I guess the question after that was, well, then why isn't he still in the race if he's doing so great? I guess I'm just too magnanimous, or I'm one of those people, I want to meet everybody. Do you know what I mean? I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative, but I think it's surprising to me that somebody that's been in the public eye as long as she has, they've requested interviews from her before. I'm sure there's 100 requests they've made over the course of her either career as a senator, vice president, whatever. It's a small world. And if the first time you met Brett Baier was as an interview for president 3 weeks before, that's kind of surprising to me.
Well, I think it's the hunker down in the basement sort of strategy, and it worked last time.
It did.
So, she's probably thinking, why do I need to do anything different? Except for that the polls are still a little too tight, and Georgia's a little too important. And it's that slice, correct me if I'm wrong, is it 6% undecided voters here?
Something like that, yeah.
And when you consider it was 11,000 votes last time that separated Biden from Trump, it's going to be peeling away votes one by one here. That's going to make a difference.
Yes.
And we've only got 7 states that are really going to decide this election. So all eyes are on us, and we've got to do what we can to bring out the vote for President Trump. I don't know how it's interesting. So many of, I'm sure your listeners and conservatives I know, think that it was a slam dunk and she lost the race with that, interview.
Oh, no. And no. I mean, it's still going to be close because let's face it, most people don't watch things like that. People like us do, and people that are in do, but the average person, I said maybe she's reaching the people she wants to reach, but she's probably not, because if you want to, now, granted, Fox does have the most diverse audience, so you got your best chance of reaching those people. But people don't watch appointment TV anymore, and they're going to watch it afterwards, or they're going to see clips. And anytime you see clips, there's a bias involved with how they pick the clips. I remember I was on Chris Matthews' show years ago, Hardball, and it was always like 4 liberals and me on the panel when I would do MSNBC. And it was during the Iraq War, and I was talking about liberal bias. And Chris jumped on me, and I said, Chris, you're not listening to me. The bias doesn't come in carrying an event live. Okay, that's carried live, and you can decide. The bias comes in when your producer decides what clips they're going to put forward and how you're going to couch those. That's where the bias comes in. Okay, so it's either a liberal bias or a conservative bias. Very few times. News Nation does a pretty good job of going after all sides and including all sides. They also do a really good job of not just doing a story one night and you never hear it again. They do a good job of carrying the story along and taking it to a conclusion. But in general, the bias, and he had to back down from that. Chris had to back down from that because I was saying, I'm not saying when you cover a live event. What I'm saying is when you decide what 30 seconds you're going to run every hour for the next 2 days, that's where the bias comes in.
Look, I bet a lot of your listeners do not take the New York Times, but because of what I do take the New York Times. And their online coverage, they've got a bunch of pundits that are all sort of texting their coverage live when there's a debate or there's an important interview. And you can just see the bias. There'll be not one comment that's positive for the conservative or the Republican, and fawning comments over, the Democrat. But it's time for us to stop complaining, I think. I think this is reality. What are we going to do about it? That's what I want to know. And I think it's really important for us to realize that everything is being interpreted for us, but we know reality. I mean, we know that gas and groceries are too much. We know that we feel insecure in our neighborhoods, walking down the street, jogging on college campuses. We're pretty clear that fentanyl is coming across the border, and people we know, like in Buckhead, are dying.
So Brian from Monroe said, "Please tell me how Trump's personality affects anyone's life. At the end of the day, all I care about is policy. Personality has no effect on my pocketbook, safety, freedoms, etc."
Well, that's
the way a guy would look at it.
Well, no, I appreciate that, Brian, and I'm with you there. But we do need to recognize that personality, tone, bombastic remarks turn voters off. And so our job is to actually do what you just said, which is to say, you don't have to like him, but we do need to bring, the temperature of the world and of our country sort of down.
And to prove your point, Hillary Clinton, basket of deplorables. That saying, which seems like nothing now, tanked her campaign, tanked her campaign. And, it's, go back to Mitt Romney, the 47% that's never going to vote for him. Those are those kinds of statements that seem like nothing compared to what we've had to deal with in the last few months, but they did make a difference.
Well, I don't know if you paid attention, but I made a note here and I brought it with me to the studio, that there was something that she said in that interview that reminded me of Hillary Clinton calling 50% of America a basket of deplorables. And it was when Bret Baier asked her why 78% of Americans trust Trump over her on the economy. And she ended up saying, and I wrote down, it's about minute 13, she ended up saying, quote, "Well, it's been clear to those that study and understand how economic policy works that my plan is better." Meaning, the smart people out there understand that I'm better for the economy, but the 78% of Americans?
What are the 3 virtues that you see in Vice President Kamala Harris?
That's a very hard question. That's the toughest question. The other ones are easy.
He actually answers this well, folks, so hear this. This is good.
I think she's harmed our country horribly, horribly, at the border, with inflation, with so many other things. But she seems to have an ability to survive. Because, she was out of the race and all of a sudden she's running for president. That's a great ability that some people have and some people don't have. She seems to have some pretty long-time friendships, and that's, also, I don't call that an ability. I call that a good thing. And she seems to have a nice way about her. I mean, I like the way, some of her statements, some of her, the way she behaves in a certain way. But in another way, I think it's very bad for our country, very bad for our country.
It is the Martha Zoller Show. So this was at Univision. Leah Aldridge is here with me today. And he got asked the question. That's why you had the Spanish and English interpretation. And, he was asked to give 3 qualities, good qualities about, I need to go back and pull what Kamala Harris said about Trump. But I thought that was interesting, and it was a nice tone, actually, that he had on that.
Yeah, I think that they should be doing more of that, actually, so that we can, see our leaders actually being human the way we would be if we were at church or synagogue or met someone in Publix. It's a lot harder to demonize someone when they're right in front of you. And I think that that's, really what a lot of women in Georgia can get turned off by politics altogether, Martha. And, that's one of our biggest concerns at Women Lead Right, is that these busy working mothers are going to be so turned off by these 2 candidates that they're not going to get to the polls. And we've got to make sure that every person that we know understands what's at stake in this election. And the visions for the United States that these two candidates are putting out are dramatically different. I mean, it's not, you've got an apple and an orange. I mean, it's very, very different. So we know that the women that we're trying to reach, pocketbook issues. It's number one. It's not abortion. As much as the Democrats are trying to change the topic of conversation, it's not abortion for these women.
And I've had I do interviews with all the contested races that are in this area. And there are 2 House seats, one in Gwinnett County and one, it's got Gwinnett and Hall in it. And then there's another one in Hall County that's got 2 women running in it that are Democrats. And when I interviewed both of them, they said the number one issue was abortion. And I just don't hear that. I don't hear that. It's not that I don't think that it's an issue that people care about. I just think that it's what I see is inflation and immigration and the economy come before those among the women that I know.
I'd have to say, if I was to give you one word, I'd have to say it's security. It's like, I'm secure in knowing I can pay my bills at the end of the month. I'm secure in knowing that I can walk my dog safely. I'm secure knowing that, our country is not going to be invaded by Iran. But I think it's security, and right now we're not feeling very secure.
So we got a text message in that said, women think Trump's rhetoric is too much, too harsh, too divisive, so they won't vote for him. Who are these women? We need someone like Trump to be a strong president and stand up for America. I really don't understand who these women are. It seems whiny and not real smart. When our economy, safety, and stopping the invasion in the border, keeping men out of our female children's sports, restrooms, locker room, we need a tough person like Trump to turn our country back to what's right. It's not the Harris team at all.
Who was that?
He didn't sign it.
Oh, do we know it's a man or a woman?
I
we
don't know.
Yeah. I think it could be a woman. And I agree with that, the person that texted you personally. But my job isn't to just listen to people with whom I agree at Women Lead Right. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's to understand the women who are going to decide this election and who are going to continue to decide elections in Georgia. So we know that there are more women that are registered to vote, and that there are more women that cast votes in the last election in Georgia, as well as nationwide. So understanding their perspective and understanding how to package what we say so that it's digestible, accepted by these women. I mean, that's the entire mission of Women Lead Right. And I want to tell that person that texted you, Martha, I'm on it.
Yeah.
I'm on it. And I agree. I absolutely agree that his strength will settle the world events down. And I agree that his strength will settle our economy down. And that's the message that we try to portray to these undecided women voters that are mostly in and around Metro Atlanta.
So Bill said, hey, your guest said not one of your listeners take the New York Times. I don't think you said that.
Mm-hmm.
I think you said you didn't think they probably took the New York Times. I actually take it because of the database. Mm-hmm. They have the best database if you're searching for history on issues. They have the best database. So anyway, he says he does. And the Wall Street Journal. Don't read any editorials, but the reporting is great on both sides. So let's not roll your listeners into one bundle, which is what most media try to do today. We need to hear all points of view. As with all politicians, VP Harris may not have been direct in answers, but her body language shows she was gutsy and fighting spirit. She can go toe-to-toe with Putin or anyone on the world stage. That's Bill. That's my lone Democrat that texts into me, which is okay. I'm glad he feels that way about her. Mm-hmm. We're not trying to change his mind.
No. And, I appreciate it, Bill, because it's good to know that not everyone that listens to Martha is a conservative. And I'm glad that you're out there taking news from different sources. I know a lot of conservatives don't trust the New York Times, and I find that there's a lot of smart reporting from lots of news outlets.
I always tell people that you may not like, you need to look at the editorial page. You need to read things you don't like, but also, and I'll say this about the New York Times, they do some great documentaries that are available through their through the newspaper that is really, like they did early on, one of the best documentaries on January 6th that was balanced, that had all sides, not like some of these hearings we heard, but had all sides about what happened that day. And they did a fantastic job on it. And so I try to look at a lot of different things. I look at the New York Times, the Washington Post. I read The Economist, the Daily Mail. I like to get how European sources are looking at our news, because sometimes you get a better view than what we get here because we're following the shiny ball all the time with our news coverage. So I read everything, actually.
Well, I'll tell you, the New York Times did a piece recently about the DEI infrastructure at the University of Michigan. I don't know if you read it. It was compelling and alarming. And so I agree with you there. I also think that issue, what's happening in our colleges, on college campuses, whether it's anti-Semitism, the sort of anger and distrust that so many of our young people have for each other, it's another aspect that's, I think, driving folks to look at Trump that might not otherwise.
So in 2016, the New York Times realized that they got it all wrong, that they completely misread. And then they sent some reporters down south to see what these Trump voters were like, and it was almost like it was a different species. But they came back and they said, these were really nice people that had legitimate reasons why they voted for Trump. They weren't crazy. They just had reasons. But then they also hired Barry Weiss, who was supposed to be, Barry Weiss is not a moderate or a conservative, but for them, she was. Do you know what I mean? She was. They hired her to look at the mistakes they had made related to Trump. And then fairly quickly, she got fired and she started something called the Free Press, which she does a great job with. I mean, there are great journalists there. There are journalists that have been kicked out for being, from other places. She does this podcast called Honestly, where she gets into really difficult subjects. And so, you know what? I'm glad that I learned about Barry Weiss from the New York Times.
Yeah, I hear you. I follow her as well. I mean, she's pretty compelling. She is no conservative.
She is no conservative.
She lives in San Francisco.
With her wife.
With her
and
wife.
Her 2 children. Yeah.
I think that she's someone who cares about free expression and a free press and our civil liberties. And I care about those too. I'm a lawyer. And
Democrats used to care about that too, but now they talk about limiting it.
Yeah, it's interesting how things have flipped. I think sometimes I feel like I'm in a fun house, looking in a mirror where everything's a little upside down. And I think that is how a lot of women feel, and it makes them back away from politics. And what we want to do is to say, exactly what's happening in your life, with your family, in your neighborhood, at your Gainesville Square. You know what needs to happen here. And it's that, 4.5 more years of the policies that have put us here are not going to win the day, right? What's happening on the world stage, I'm surprised there were no questions about what's happening on the world stage, really.
Yes.
Except for, I guess, the question to Harris about
Iran,
or about the biggest threat, and
yes.
She identified, said it was Iran. I think that some of those issues and the Ukraine and Israel, those are real threats to our way of life.
Well, 30 minutes isn't enough to get into all the issues you should do with a presidential candidate, and he didn't get 30 minutes. He got about 22 or 23 minutes, something like that. So I think she should do more of this. I don't think she will, but I think she should do more of it. Andrea said, I'd love to see you go toe-to-toe with the View crew, Joy Reid, Rachel Maddow, and those 2 knuckleheads on Morning Joe. They hold court on bamboozling the bozos. And look, yeah, I love that. I've done a lot of that in the past. I'm not doing so much TV anymore because I just made a choice. I didn't want to do as much. I do the Georgia Gang, and I'm getting a lot of print interview calls because of my Georgia knowledge, and everybody wants to know about Georgia. But, I'm just trying to focus more on what's really important in my life, and jumping on a TV interview at 2 a.m. is not one of those.
Well, I appreciate, though, what your listener, is talking about. She wants to see more strong women like you, Martha, that are taking on this kind of liberal coastal elite type perspective that it feels like it's swaying the day. It feels like, the musicians at concerts, whatever you read, actors, everybody's on one side. And it can make you feel pretty alone. And I'll tell you, it's one of the reasons that Women Lead Right has started college chapters. We've got one at Georgia Tech. I was there last week with these young women who are just absolutely dynamic and incredible.
And the thing about Georgia Tech, which is so interesting, is that while the liberal arts school is not as big as the engineering school, it drives everything that goes on there because those are the people that have time. You know what I mean? It's like, and it's so frustrating because you wouldn't think Georgia Tech would even have a bent. They wouldn't be liberal or conservative because they're an engineering school, but they got the same problems there that they do on every other college campus.
They do. They absolutely do. And I was in Athens on Monday. And we're launching our chapter in Athens. And people assume Athens is filled with a bunch of conservative women, and it's not.
No.
And these conservative young girls feel totally alone because they're bombarded with information from influencers on TikTok that's telling them that they should be progressive, that if you're smart, you're sophisticated,
if you're on the right side of history,
right, then you're a Democrat, right? Because the
right.
Democratic Party is the party of women and for women.
Brian Seltzer from CNN said Kamala Harris essentially walked into a Trump campaign field office and said, "Ask me anything." That is just, I love the way the left, and especially this is on CNN where nobody watches you anymore, CNN, okay? And 72% of your audience is liberal, so I get you're playing to your audience. But they hate the fact that Fox News, which we are a Fox Radio affiliate, actually has the most diverse audience. They have but it's still only 6 to 8 million people a night. And when NBC News at its height had 49 million people a night, the whole cable news universe doesn't even add up to 49 million anymore because people are getting their news in all different kinds of places, which is good. Like I always say, there's a good and a bad to everything. Communication's fantastic. Having all these sources is fantastic. The other side of that is you don't know what's credible and what's not credible if you don't do a little digging. And the women you're talking about don't have time to dig.
They don't have time to dig. I mean, I think that's why we talk to them about just they know their reality, they know their hearts, and they know that 4.5 more years of this really won't do. So let's, hold your nose or say you don't like them. That's fine. But let's give him a chance because let's remember the world was not on fire when he was president. I mean, of course, once COVID hit, everything was on fire. But our economy was stronger. And things were a bit settled and more secure. And I think everybody does remember that. I tell you, I was asking Martha at the break if she saw any pictures of Kamala's rally in Pennsylvania, because I kind of call her Chameleon Kamala, because all of a sudden we had chants of USA, and she had a big red banner behind her, kind of a big patriotic type of scenario that she's trying to present herself as someone who's a real patriot and is going to lead from the center when her record demonstrates anything but.
Yeah, and it's just, look, I think I am still holding out hope that this is not going to be as razor thin as we think it is. Because but I know, you can't measure the people that don't want to say they're voting for Trump. You can't measure the people that may or may not go to the polls. There's a lot of unknowns that we don't know. But I just think that the average person actually knows their reality. And I know I don't answer polls anymore. I get polled all the time. Now, it's funny, somewhere along the line, because my daughter is still on my plan, because it's a family plan. She pays for it, though. I know she's 32, but she pays for it. But I get, Democrat polls, which I shouldn't get. But I get them because, they're tied to her, and she's voted Democrat a few times. And so I just answer them for fun and do crazy answers.
Oh, that's hilarious. Well, I get texts and
because of where
mailers.
You live, I'm sure.
No, it's a little different. My children, I have a daughter who's about 25, and 2 sons that are in college. They're all out of state. And so I order their absentee ballots like every mother who's listening that has an out-of-state, even if they're a young professional, they probably haven't changed where they vote, which means they need to have a Georgia ballot. So I order it and I send it up to them, and I put my phone number and my email address so they think I am both Leah Aldridge as well as Isabel Aldridge, John Aldridge, and Stanton Aldridge. And so it's interesting to see what's being, how they're being targeted. And my daughter is targeted constantly with abortion issue advertising, constantly. So they think that's the winner for any woman who's under the age of 25.
So what's she doing these days, 25?
She's in medical school.
Oh, right. Good for her.
Yeah.
So she would be like maybe third year?
She is.
She's
third year in medical school. So
my husband is a doctor. And so, yeah, he had the 4 years. Does she know what she wants to do yet?
She doesn't. I mean, she's really kind of in the middle of trying to discern what type of life she wants, what kind of practice she hopes to have, and where she might want to do her residency.
Well, congrats to her. Yeah. Leah Aldridge, give the website quickly.
Yes, it's womenleadrightga.org. So womenleadrightga.org. Come join us.
To hear the full versions of last week's Martha Zoller shows, go to the podcast page at accesswdun.com, and you can follow me on social media at Martha Zoller.